Hey guys, welcome back. Go ahead and do yourself a favor. Lower the volume just a touch, put the phone down somewhere safe, and let your eyes get heavy. Tonight, we're heading somewhere cold. Not forgot my jacket cold, not why did I move here cold, the kind of cold that makes the concept of warmth feel like a rumor. We're drifting east, far east, past the places people usually stop naming, into a stretch of land where winter doesn't arrive so much as declare permanent ownership. Snow settles in like it has a mortgage, breath turns solid, and silence becomes so thick it feels padded. Tonight's story begins in that silence. It starts with an old woman, a very old woman, and a tiger cub that absolutely should not have been there. Now, this is not a fairy tale, no twinkling music, no destiny, just exhaustion, cold, and a series of decisions that objectively were not great, but somehow, impossibly, worked anyway. So let's ease into it. Our setting is the Russian Far East, a region that feels like someone took Siberia and said, yes, but lonelier. This is tiger country, real tiger country, the last stronghold of the Amur tiger, the largest tiger on Earth, built like a refrigerator with opinions. These animals are not subtle. They are massive, solitary, and generally uninterested in human interaction, which is ideal because humans are equally uninterested in interacting with something that can quietly end them in under 10 seconds. Normally. But winters here don't care about what's normal. Temperatures can drop so low that exposed skin starts making life decisions. Snow piles up in layers, each one a reminder that leaving the house was a mistake. Forest paths vanish. Sounds don't travel correctly. Everything becomes muted, distant, slowed down. And in one of these winters, one that was particularly unforgiving, even by local standards, something small went wrong in the forest. A tiger cub became separated from its mother. No dramatic chase, no gunshots, no villain, just the quiet, awful math of nature. Maybe the mother was hunting, maybe she was injured, maybe the cub wandered just a little too far, because cubs are famously bad at long-term planning. And once alone, a cub in this environment doesn't have much time. Amur tiger cubs are tough, but not that tough. They rely on their mother not just for food, but for navigation, warmth, and survival instructions. Without her, the forest becomes very large, very fast. The cub wandered. Through trees that all looked the same, through snow that kept getting deeper, through cold that didn't stop to explain itself. By the time it reached the edge of human territory, it wasn't hunting, it wasn't exploring, it was barely moving. Which brings us back to the woman. Her name was Galina. She was in her 80s, and she lived alone. Already, this is not going well. Galina lived in a small wooden house on the edge of a village that most maps politely ignore. Her life was quiet, predictable, structured around chores that had been the same for decades. Chop wood, feed animals, heat water, repeat. This was not a woman looking for adventure. She was not waiting for fate. She was waiting for winter to end, like everyone else. That day, she was outside doing what old women in remote regions have always done, moving slowly, carefully, and with the deep confidence of someone who has outlived every bad idea she ever had. And then she saw something in the snow. At first, she thought it was a dog. Because of course she did. Your brain doesn't leap straight to endangered apex predator when you're 80 and cold. It goes with the option that doesn't raise your blood pressure. But this was not a dog. The shape was wrong, the stripes were unmistakable, and the eyes, those enormous glassy eyes, looked less like threat and more like confusion. The cub didn't growl, it didn't run, it didn't do anything impressive at all. It just stood there, shivering. Now here's the moment where every wildlife expert on Earth would like to gently intervene, because the correct response, the official response, the response printed on every safety pamphlet, is to back away slowly and call someone with tranquilizers and a helicopter. Galena did not do that. Galena sighed.
Not a dramatic sigh, not a heroic one. Just the tired sigh of someone who has seen enough life to know when something is in trouble. She later said she thought, very simply, it will die out here. And she was right. So she did the thing you are absolutely not supposed to do. She approached it. The cub didn't resist. It didn't even react much. It was too cold, too hungry, too done. Galena wrapped it in an old blanket, because of course she had one, and began the slow, careful process of getting a tiger cub into her house without alarming the universe. Somehow, this worked. Inside, the house was barely warmer than outside. A stove crackled weakly. The air smelled like wood smoke and age. Galena set the cub near the fire, gave it water, and sat down like this was just another strange Tuesday. Now, let's pause here for a second, because this woman was not naive. She knew what tigers were. She had grown up in this region. She knew that adult tigers kill people, livestock, and occasionally entire plants. But this wasn't an adult tiger. This was a small, half-frozen disaster with paws. She fed it what little meat she had. She kept it warm. She talked to it quietly, because silence can feel heavier than speech when you're alone that long. The cub slept for hours, and Galena stayed awake, listening, because at the back of her mind was the one thought that refused to go away. The mother will come. Adult Amur tigers do not misplace their children and shrug. They search, they track, and if they find a human involved, they do not ask questions first. Galena knew this, and still she didn't put the cub back outside. By morning, the cub was stronger, still weak but alive in a way it hadn't been before, and Galena made the next decision, arguably the bravest or dumbest of her life. She contacted the authorities. This is where the story could have turned bureaucratic. Forms, delays, shrugs, but instead it triggered something rare: concern. Wildlife officials arrived cautiously, expecting chaos. What they found instead was an old woman, a stove, and a tiger cub curled up like it had always lived there. They moved quickly. The cub was taken for care, plans were made, nature was gently nudged back toward balance. And Galena returned to her quiet house. She assumed that was the end of it. It was not, because a few nights later, something came to her door, and it was big, very big. Let's slow down here. Let the snow fall. Let the fire crackle, because whatever was outside that house had crossed miles of frozen forest to get there. And that's where we'll gently pause for now.
The doorway that suddenly contained a tiger. So, night settles early out here. It doesn't ease in. It arrives like a blanket being dropped over the world. One moment there's a faint blue glow on the snow, and the next everything is black and quiet and waiting. And then the dogs started acting strange. Not barking, not growling, just refusing to go near the door. Huddled shapes, tails low, the kind of behavior animals save for earthquakes and things they absolutely do not want to explain. Galena noticed because she always noticed. You don't reach your 80s alone in the Far East by missing small changes. She stood slowly, her joints complained, everything complained, and she walked toward the door. That's when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure. A presence, the sense that something large was standing very still just on the other side of the wood. No scratching, no growling, no dramatic entrance, just silence. Galena later said she didn't feel fear at first. That came later. At the moment itself, she felt something closer to resignation. The calm acceptance of someone who understands probabilities and has decided not to argue with them. She opened the door, and there, filling the space where the night should have been, was a tiger. An adult Amur tiger. Massive, tall, broad-headed, its fur was thick with frost, each breath sending slow clouds of steam into the air. Its eyes reflected the lamplight with that unsettling intelligence that predators always seem to have, like they are actively evaluating your usefulness. This was not the cub. This was the mother. Now, let's just sit with that image for a second. An 80-something woman, a wooden house, a doorway, and one of the largest wild cats on Earth standing politely outside like it has business to discuss. This is the part of the story where movies would add swelling music, where the tiger would roar, where the woman would freeze in terror. None of that happened. The tiger did not attack. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It just stood there. Galena and the tiger looked at each other. Time stretches in moments like this. Seconds feel padded, slowed, thick. Galena later said she could hear her own breathing, loud and unhelpful. She didn't raise her arms. She didn't scream. She didn't do anything clever at all. She spoke, quietly, calmly, in the same voice she used for animals her whole life. She told the tiger that the cub was alive, that it had been taken somewhere warm, that people were helping it. She did not expect to be understood. She was simply filling the silence. The tiger listened. And here's where things get uncomfortable in a very gentle way, because there is no scientific explanation that fits neatly into a report, no data point that makes everyone happy. But the tiger did something unusual. It sat down, right there in the snow. Not aggressively, not defensively, just settled, like an exhausted parent who has finally found the right address. It stayed for several minutes, maybe longer. Galena wasn't timing it. She was too busy being intensely aware of her own mortality. And then, just as quietly as it arrived, the tiger stood up. It looked at her one last time, and it left. No sound, no drama, just a huge shape dissolving back into the trees. Galena closed the door. She leaned against it, and only then did her legs start shaking, because apparently that's how adrenaline works when it realizes you're not dead yet. Now, if this were a legend, it would end there. Old woman meets tiger, mutual respect, nature restored. Everyone nods thoughtfully. But reality, as usual, was messier. Because Galena didn't keep this to herself. She told neighbors. Neighbors told officials. Officials told biologists. And suddenly, a quiet act of compassion became a case study. Wildlife experts were stunned. Tigers do not do this. They don't seek humans out peacefully. They don't knock. They don't sit and wait. Unless something very specific is happening. The prevailing theory, and yes, even scientists sometimes say theory with a shrug, is that the tiger had followed the cub's scent, found it ended at Galena's house, and made a decision, not to attack, but to check, which suggests a level of situational judgment that makes everyone a little uncomfortable, because we like animals to be predictable, instinct-driven, simple. This was none of that. The cub, meanwhile, was recovering, slowly, carefully, fed, monitored, kept warm. Eventually, it would be reintroduced into the wild, part of a broader effort to stabilize a species that has never really recovered from humans discovering it existed. And Galena, she went back to
When the forest decides to remember you. After that night, life did not suddenly become poetic. There were no follow-up visits from the tiger, no repeat appearances, no lingering footprints by the door in the mornings, waiting to be discovered like proof of a miracle. Instead, there was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles back in once something extraordinary decides it has said enough. Galina woke the next morning the same way she always did, slowly, carefully, with the mild disappointment of realizing she was still very much alive and therefore still required to stand up and tend to a stove. Her house looked unchanged. The snow outside had erased every sign of the visitor, smoothing the ground back into something anonymous and harmless. If she hadn't remembered the weight of that presence, the steady eyes, the breath fogging the dark, she might have convinced herself it was a dream. Old age does that, people say. Memories soften, edges blur. But this one stayed sharp. She fed the dogs. They stayed close to her legs that day, refusing to wander far, as if the forest had temporarily lost its sense of humor. Galina let them. She understood. Word traveled slowly, as it always does in places like this. First as disbelief, then as curiosity, then as something that made people lower their voices when they repeated it. Officials came back, not because they doubted her, but because they didn't know what to do with a story like that. There were questions. Did the tiger behave aggressively? Did it bare its teeth? Did it vocalize? Galina answered patiently. No, no, no. She told them the truth, which somehow made everyone more uncomfortable than a dramatic lie would have. The tiger had not acted like a monster. It had acted like a mother who wanted confirmation. That detail stuck with the biologists. In the weeks that followed, the cub continued to recover. It ate. It gained strength. It developed the clumsy confidence of something that had narrowly avoided dying and didn't fully understand how close it came. Cameras documented its progress. Charts were filled out. Checklists were completed. Eventually, the day came to return it to the forest. This part was not sentimental, it was procedural. The cub was transported carefully, released into a protected area far from roads and villages. The hope was simple and fragile, that instinct would take over where circumstance had failed. No one told Galina exactly when this happened. She found out later, and she nodded, as if she had expected it all along. After that, things went back to normal, or as normal as they ever are when you live at the edge of wilderness and time moves differently. Seasons shifted, snow melted, snow returned. Galina aged another year, quietly collecting it like a scarf she never asked for. But something had changed, not in her house, not in her routine, in the way the forest felt. She spoke about it only once, and only to someone who listened more than they talked. She said that after the cub was returned, the woods seemed to settle, as if a balance had been nudged back into place, as if something unfinished had finally been completed. Scientists don't write that down, but they remember it. Stories like this are dangerous to people who like clean explanations. They sit in the uncomfortable space between instinct and awareness, between behavior and something that looks suspiciously like recognition. Humans have spent thousands of years telling stories about animals that remember kindness, wolves that guide lost travelers, lions that spare children, snakes that guard homes. Most of these stories are brushed aside as myth, which is comforting. Myths don't require action. Reality does. But every so often, a real story slips through. Not loud enough to rewrite textbooks, not dramatic enough to be a warning, just quiet enough to be ignored. And that's usually where they stay. Galina never asked for attention. She didn't frame herself as special. When reporters eventually came, she looked faintly annoyed, like someone whose nap had been interrupted for reasons that were not persuasive. She repeated the same explanation. It was cold. To her, that was sufficient. A small creature was freezing. She had warmth. The rest unfolded on its own. There's something unsettling about that simplicity, because it removes the distance we like to keep between ourselves and responsibility. It suggests that extraordinary moments aren't always driven by courage or destiny, but by mundane decisions made without ceremony. Feed the stove, open the door, help what is in front of you. The tiger never returned, or at least not in any way that could be proven. But sometimes, late at night, Galena would hear movement beyond the tree line, heavy, deliberate, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to deer or wind. She never checked. She didn't need to. She would sit by the stove and listen, letting the sound pass through the darkness like a thought you don't follow all the way to the end. Somewhere out there, a tiger lived. Somewhere out there, a cub grew into something powerful and solitary and free. It would never know her name. It would never understand houses or stoves or blankets. But it would know, in whatever way animals know such things, that once, on the coldest edge of its life, the forest had briefly opened into warmth. And maybe that was enough. Not a bond, not a friendship, just a moment that didn't need to be repeated. The world is full of stories where humans dominate nature, conquer it, cage it, or destroy it. This was not one of those stories. This was smaller, quieter, easier to miss. An old woman did not change the world. She simply refused to let something freeze in front of her. And the forest noticed. In the next part, we'll drift outward again, away from this one house and into the long, uneasy history of humans living beside dangerous animals. Kings who kept lions in castles, emperors who slept near leopards, and the strange belief, repeated across centuries, that power meant proximity to teeth. For now, let the night stay still, let the snow fall softly, and let this story rest where it belongs.